I thought I was just moving in, until she caught me where I shouldn't be, and suddenly, nothing felt accidental. The day I moved into the old apartment building felt ordinary enough, boxes stacked in the back of my beat-up car, a few errands completed in a blur of warm sunlight and city noise. But then I met her. She was standing at the door when I lugged the last box inside. My first impression, composed, graceful, quietly radiant. Not in a showy way, but in the way someone's presence seems to fill a room without effort. Her hair, dark with subtle highlights, caught the sunlight streaming through the hall's dusty windows. She smiled, a brief, knowing curve of her lips, and in that moment, I realized I'd never really noticed how much a single smile could make a space feel warmer. As she introduced herself, I caught the soft floral scent she carried. Not overpowering, just a trace that lingered around her, wrapping the narrow hallway in something intimate, comforting. I tried to focus on her words, her polite but confident tone, but my attention kept drifting to the way her hands moved, lightly resting on the doorframe, adjusting a loose strand of hair, brushing against the hem of her dress. Small gestures, almost imperceptible, but somehow magnetic. There was a quiet strength in the way she looked at me, as though she could see more than just the young man fumbling with boxes. Her eyes were sharp yet gentle, a strange combination that left me feeling both scrutinized and oddly safe. I noticed the subtle pause in her voice, the slight tilt of her head when she spoke, the way she let silence stretch just long enough for me to feel the pull of it. I tried to act natural, but I knew my heart was racing faster than it should have been for a casual introduction. My hands itched to help with something, anything, rearranging a box, adjusting a rug, but I stayed rooted, aware that my every movement seemed amplified under her gaze. The first impression wasn't just about noticing her beauty or charm. It was about sensing a rhythm, a subtle tension, a quiet invitation I wasn't entirely sure I was ready to accept. There was something unspoken in that brief meeting, something teasing, alive, like the air itself had shifted in anticipation. By the time I managed to set down my boxes and thank her for showing me in, I realized this wasn't going to be a simple landlord-tenant relationship. It was going to be something else. Something that made ordinary hallways feel electric, every glance loaded with possibility, every casual smile a gentle spark. And somewhere deep inside, I had a feeling that the moment I stepped over that threshold, nothing about this move would remain ordinary for long. It wasn't supposed to happen. I knew the rules: knock before entering, respect boundaries, but in the rush of unpacking, I had forgotten. The hallway smelled faintly of old wood and cleaning solution, mixed with the lingering scent of her perfume. I pushed the door open, expecting the empty apartment, and instead, there she was. She stood there in the doorway, arms crossed lightly, one eyebrow arched. The look she gave me wasn't anger, not exactly, it was amused, teasing, and somehow entirely disarming. I froze for a second, heart hammering in a way that made me acutely aware of every beat, every nervous flutter in my chest. "You forgot to knock," she said softly, her voice carrying a warmth that made the words sting and thrill all at once. I stumbled for a reply, cheeks burning. I knew you wanted me inside," I blurted out before I could stop myself. Immediately, I wanted to disappear, but the way she tilted her head, the hint of a smile curling at the corner of her lips, told me she wasn't offended. There was a moment, a heartbeat stretched long and thin, when we simply looked at each other. I noticed the subtle rise and fall of her chest, the soft shimmer in her eyes, and the faint way the light caught in her hair. Her hand brushed against the doorframe as if she weren't entirely sure what to do with it, and I felt a small, electric shiver run through me. Her reaction wasn't dramatic. She didn't scold or shoo me away. Instead, she let the silence hang, letting the tension grow thicker, sweeter, more intimate. The air between us felt charged, each unspoken word a thread pulling us closer together, even though we were only standing a few feet apart. I wanted to step forward, to apologize properly, to make a joke, to anything. But all I could do was feel the warmth of the room, the subtle pressure of her gaze, the way my own pulse seemed to echo hers. I realized then that this wasn't just an awkward accident, it was the first real spark, the first undeniable pull between us. Finally, she shook her head with that quiet, teasing authority, stepping aside so I could pass. "Just, try to remember next time," she said, her voice soft, playful, yet carrying a depth I couldn't quite place. And as I moved past her, heart still racing, I knew one thing for certain: nothing about this apartment, or this landlady, was going to be ordinary. Every glance, every word, every accidental brush of hands was now loaded with meaning, and I was more aware than ever that I was already falling into something I wasn't ready to name. After that first accidental encounter, the apartment felt different. The hallways, the small kitchen, even the way the sunlight fell through the dusty windows, everything seemed charged with a quiet tension I hadn't noticed before. It wasn't overt, not yet. But every glance we exchanged, every incidental touch, now carried a weight I couldn't ignore. Our interactions became small exercises in restraint and observation. When she leaned over the counter to reach a misplaced jar, her hand would brush against mine ever so slightly, and I would feel an electric jolt, my skin remembering the warmth of her touch long after she'd stepped away. I wanted to pretend it was nothing, but every time our fingers touched, even briefly, I became acutely aware of the magnetic pull between us. Her presence was comforting in ways I hadn't anticipated. The soft hum of her voice as she explained building quirks, the way she adjusted a picture frame or ran her hand along the banister, it was all graceful, intimate, and mesmerizing. I found myself lingering on details: the gentle curve of her wrist, the subtle tilt of her head when she smiled, the faint scent of her perfume mixing with the warm, sunlit air of the apartment. Even casual chores became moments of subtle closeness. Folding laundry together, our shoulders would brush, our movements hesitant yet deliberate. I noticed the way she exhaled softly, a small laugh escaping when I fumbled with a stubborn shirt, and I felt a warmth spreading through me that had nothing to do with the apartment's heaters. Yet, for all the tension, boundaries remained. She was confident, poised, aware of the age difference and the propriety of the situation. Her teasing was light, never forced, her touches fleeting, but enough to make my heart race. I, too, learned restraint, lingering glances, suppressed smiles, the quiet excitement of being near her without crossing the line. Internally, I struggled. Part of me was captivated by her elegance and warmth, drawn in by her quiet vulnerability behind that confident exterior. Another part worried about overstepping, about misreading the signals. And yet, the tension only deepened, a slow burn I couldn't, and didn't want to, extinguish. By the end of the week, I realized something profound: these fleeting touches, these moments of accidental closeness, were no longer accidental at all. They were shaping a rhythm between us, an unspoken dialogue of desire, respect, and curiosity. Each encounter left me more aware of her presence, more sensitive to her gestures, and more aware that something quietly extraordinary was beginning, something neither of us had planned, yet neither of us could deny. The apartment was no longer just a place to live. It was a space where anticipation, attraction, and unspoken longing mingled with the ordinary, turning mundane moments into charged encounters I couldn't stop thinking about. The evening had settled into a quiet hush, the kind that makes small spaces feel intimate and almost sacred. I had been helping her organize some boxes in the corner of the apartment when a minor mishap sent a jar of tea spilling across the counter. We both froze for a moment, then laughed nervously, and that shared laughter seemed to break a small barrier I hadn't realized existed. We found ourselves side by side, cleaning up the mess. Her hand brushed against mine as we reached for the same towel, and for a heartbeat, the room seemed suspended in a delicate tension. The warmth of her touch lingered, as if the air itself had absorbed the subtle electricity of that moment. I caught myself glancing at her face, noticing the way her eyes softened when she smiled, the faint curve of her lips when she laughed, and the quiet steadiness in the way she moved. Somehow, the conversation drifted from casual small talk to something more personal. She spoke softly, almost hesitantly, about a regret from her past, a dream she had set aside, a choice she had questioned for years. Her vulnerability was unexpected, but it wasn't fragile. It was quiet strength revealed in trust, a glimpse behind the confident exterior I had been drawn to from the start. I listened, truly listened, feeling a closeness that had nothing to do with physical proximity. When I spoke, I shared a small piece of my own past, something I hadn't told anyone before. My voice was tentative, but she encouraged me with a gentle nod, her gaze steady and unjudging. In that shared space, I felt a connection that went beyond attraction, something rare, honest, and profoundly human. As we sat close on the narrow sofa, our shoulders nearly touching, I became acutely aware of her presence. The subtle scent of her perfume, the soft rhythm of her breathing, the way her hand brushed against mine again as she reached for her cup, it all felt intimate, even without intention. My chest warmed with an unspoken awareness. We were navigating a space that was private, tender, and electric all at once. The moment ended not with a declaration or a grand gesture, but with a quiet acknowledgement, a lingering glance, a gentle smile, a brush of fingers as she adjusted her position. It was enough to leave my heart racing, my mind replaying every detail, every small gesture. By the time I stepped away, boxes finally arranged, I realized something had shifted. There was now a foundation of trust and shared vulnerability between us, a connection that made ordinary interactions feel charged with potential. The slow burn was intensifying, and I couldn't help but sense that we were only beginning to explore the depth of what might grow between us. It was one of those evenings where the apartment seemed smaller, cozier, almost conspiratorial. We were both in the kitchen, clearing away dishes from a shared meal. Somehow, in the shuffle, I left the kitchen door unlocked, a minor oversight, but enough to set the stage for what was to come. She appeared in the doorway moments later, hands on her hips, one eyebrow raised. Her expression was a perfect blend of amusement and mock exasperation. "You're impossible," she said, though her voice carried a warmth that made the words feel teasing rather than scolding. I felt my cheeks flush, but I couldn't help grinning back. "I just wanted to make sure you knew I was paying attention," I joked, though the electricity in the air told me the moment was about more than humor. As we moved around each other in the tight space, the touches became deliberate yet delicate. Her hand brushed mine as she reached for a glass, and I felt a shiver of warmth run through me. She leaned slightly closer than necessary to hand me a dish towel, and our shoulders grazed, just enough to make both of us pause, smiles faltering for a second as if acknowledging the tension between us. There was a rhythm to it, a silent dance of flirtation that neither of us had to speak aloud. Her eyes sparkled with mischief, the way she tilted her head when she caught me staring, and the faint curve of her lips hinted at amusement that ran deeper than the surface. I noticed the way the light hit her hair, casting a soft glow, and I became hyper-aware of every subtle movement, the brush of her fingers, the tilt of her body, the gentle hum of her laughter. Dialogue was fragmented, teasing, and playful. "I knew you wanted me inside," she said at one point, and my heart skipped a beat. The words weren't accusatory, they were a playful acknowledgement of the magnetic tension that had been building for weeks. The apartment, ordinary as it was, had become a stage for these small, charged moments where attraction and restraint intertwined. Internally, I wrestled with the pull between desire and propriety. Every brush of skin, every lingering glance, sent warmth through me, yet I couldn't ignore the reality of the age difference, the boundaries, the unspoken rules. But the teasing, the laughter, the subtle intimacy, it all deepened my fascination and longing. By the time we finally finished cleaning, the air between us was thick with anticipation. The flirtation had escalated, undeniable yet restrained, leaving both of us acutely aware of the chemistry simmering just beneath the surface. Each encounter, each accidental touch, each whispered joke was now a thread weaving us closer together, a slow, deliberate burn that neither of us could, or wanted to, ignore. The evening had fallen into quiet stillness, the kind of calm that makes even the smallest sounds feel amplified. We were sitting across from each other at the small kitchen table, the soft glow of a single lamp casting warm shadows across the room. Outside, the city hummed quietly, distant and unintrusive, as if giving us space for what was about to happen. We had been talking, casually at first, about trivial things, books, music, even the way the apartment smelled after a rainstorm. But gradually, the conversation shifted, unspoken yet inevitable, toward feelings, toward things that lingered behind our glances and casual touches. Her fingers lightly brushed the edge of the table, almost accidentally, and my own hand moved slightly closer, drawn by some magnetic force I couldn't name. The warmth from her proximity was palpable, not just in touch but in presence, in the way her eyes caught the lamp's light and reflected it like a quiet beacon. She began, and then paused, as if weighing the words before letting them fall. Her voice was softer now, almost vulnerable, and I felt a jolt of awareness at the rare crack in her otherwise confident exterior. I wanted to reach out, to bridge the space between us, but hesitation rooted me to my chair. Age difference, propriety, the uncertainty of how she truly felt, all of it crowded my thoughts, demanding caution even as my heart raced. Yet the tension, the intimacy, was undeniable. Every brush of her hand against the table, every slight lean toward me, made the space between us charged with possibility. I never expected this, I admitted, my voice low, almost a whisper. The confession hung between us, fragile and weighty all at once. She looked down for a moment, then met my gaze again, steady and open. Neither did I, she said softly, her lips curving into a small, knowing smile. But it feels right, doesn't it? That word, right, hung in the air like an affirmation, a permission we hadn't dared voice until now. My pulse raced, and I felt a mixture of relief, longing, and cautious excitement. We were teetering on the edge of something deeper, something neither of us had planned but both of us craved. Our fingers hovered near each other, palms almost touching over the table, and for a long moment, we simply existed in the shared silence, aware of the warmth, aware of the unspoken desire, aware of the careful balance between restraint and surrender. By the end of the night, nothing had fully resolved, yet everything had changed. The slow burn that had been simmering for weeks was now undeniable, and the next steps, however uncertain, felt inevitable. The morning light filtered softly through the apartment window, painting the room in warm shades of gold and amber. The air smelled faintly of coffee and the subtle floral notes of her perfume, blending into a quiet, comforting intimacy. It felt different now, lighter, yet charged with everything we hadn't yet said aloud. We sat side by side on the small sofa, the space between us smaller than ever. My hand brushed hers, deliberately this time, and she didn't pull away. Instead, she let our fingers intertwine, palm pressing against palm, a small, grounding connection that spoke louder than words. Her gaze met mine, steady, warm, and a little shy, and in that look, I saw everything we had been building, the laughter, the teasing, the quiet vulnerability, and the tension that had simmered between us for weeks. We spoke softly, hesitantly at first, each word measured but sincere. There was no grand declaration, no rush, just honesty. "I'm glad we've had this," she said, her voice carrying both relief and quiet joy. I nodded, feeling the same. Every small touch, every glance, every shared laugh had led to this, a moment of understanding, of trust, and of mutual desire tempered with respect. I let my other hand rest gently against the small of her back as we leaned slightly closer, and she rested her head lightly against my shoulder. The contact was brief, subtle, but electric, a warm acknowledgement of closeness that didn't need to be rushed or complicated. I could feel the steadiness of her heartbeat against my chest, the soft rhythm grounding me as much as it seemed to ground her. The apartment, once just a place to live, now felt like a private sanctuary where the ordinary had become extraordinary. We lingered in that quiet warmth, savoring the intimacy of simply being near each other. Every brush of her hand, every fleeting glance, every gentle smile carried the weight of the weeks of slow-burn tension that had brought us here. Finally, she lifted her head, her eyes sparkling with a mixture of mischief and tenderness. "Promise me we won't rush anything," she said softly. I smiled, squeezing her hand gently. "We won't. We'll take our time." And in that moment, the story reached its quiet, satisfying resolution. There were no dramatic declarations, no hurried confessions, just warmth, closeness, and a shared understanding that this connection, however unconventional, was real, mutual, and precious. The slow burn had finally found its pause, a moment of peace and contentment that promised growth, intimacy, and trust. As we sat together, hand in hand, hearts quietly aligned, I realized that sometimes the most powerful moments in life weren't loud or grand, they were simple, tender, and profoundly human. And in that simplicity, I found everything I had been quietly longing for. If you enjoyed this slow burn story and want to see more age gap romances and heartfelt moments, make sure to hit that like button, subscribe, and turn on notifications, so you never miss a story that touches the heart.